Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ilsa Connect, and I'm the Deputy Director of Public Policy for the National Center for Victims of Crime. I want to welcome you to today's web seminar on local DNA databases. Our final participants are still logging on. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping issues. A couple people asked to have no audio. Do you have any suggestions? Usually the audio should be coming through your computer. So if you don't have audio on right now, you might want to try to turn up your speakers, turn them on or adjust them. They might be low. You can also try to call into the teleconference if you can't get it through your computer. If you have technical issues, you can call WebEx, and they are at 866-229-3239. There's the number again for you. I just want to actually take a second to mention that probably some of you who are on here and on our call and some who are still logging on, we just had an earthquake here on the East Coast, which sort of threw us off a little bit for a few minutes. So I hope everybody's fine after the earthquake, but it definitely may have thrown off people's schedule a little bit. So we hope you will be able to join us as we get started here. Just to note that all of our participants on the webinar are muted when they enter the call, so we won't be taking questions and answers verbally. The way to ask a question will be to use the question and answer tool in WebEx. And for most of you, you will see that on the right side, you'll have a series of panels. One says Q&A. You may have to maximize it. There's an arrow right next to the Q&A that will open up that little box for you. Some of you may see it as a floating toolbar, and you have to maximize that as well. Either way, you want to click on that question mark icon, and it will open a box for you to ask your question. You can type the question in the box at the bottom and hit send, and that is only seen by the panelists, not by all the attendees. So we will be answering questions at the end of our webinar today. And if we don't get to your question on the phone online today, we'll follow up with you by email. And there's actually a picture of it, so if it looks like that, you'll know you're doing the right thing. I want to talk for just a second about the National Center for Victims of Crime before I turn the webinar over to our presenters. Our mission is to forge a national commitment to help victims of crime rebuild their lives. And we do that by providing training and technical assistance to those who are working with victims of crime, victim serving professionals, law enforcement professionals, and various other allied professionals. And we work with Congress to secure funding and rights for victims and for victim services programs. And here a little bit about some of our initiatives. We are the National Stalking Resource Center, and we have a youth initiative that works on issues relating to youth victims of crime. Maximizing the use of DNA technology is important to victims. I know some people think, why is the National Center for Victims of Crime really involved in forensic DNA and DNA technology? But it is important to victims of crime. And so since about 2002, the National Center has been focusing on increasing understanding of forensic DNA and related technology, because we know that we can solve more crimes and we can actually prevent crimes by increasing the use of DNA and DNA databases. We're very pleased to bring you this webinar today with the support of Applied Biosystems Life Technologies. They're a DNA technology company that has graciously supported our work over the years to increase knowledge of how DNA technology can be used to assist criminal investigations. With their support, we have conducted many webinars, trainings, and developed also materials that are available on our website about forensic DNA for victims and law enforcement professionals who work with victims. Our webinars are all archived on our website. If you have missed any of them, they are all there. And stay tuned for upcoming webinars on collection of DNA from persons who are arrested for crimes. We'll be doing a webinar on familial and close match searching, and also using DNA in trafficking cases. We also conduct a series of in-person trainings, and we have one coming up in Oklahoma City on October 13th. All of that information is available on our website. And here that is. It's our online DNA resource center, www.ncvc.org/DNA. And this is my contact information if you have any questions or you want to let us know how we're doing in our work, or if you have any suggestions. I also want to mention that you would have seen a poll on the right side as well with your panels on the right side of your screen. That poll is a series of questions that enable us to, we'll be doing one at the end as well, which will enable us to measure the effectiveness of our work in these webinars. So we'd appreciate if you just take a minute to fill that out if you haven't yet. And then we're very, very grateful to have two experts with us today. We have Chris Asplen and Detective Sergeant Bill McVey. Our first speaker today is Chris Asplen. Chris began his career as a prosecutor specializing in child abuse and sex crimes. He has worked at the National District Attorneys Association, where he was the director of the DNA Legal Assistance Unit. He was an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., and was appointed executive director of the Attorney General's National Commission on the Future of DNA Evidence. Mr. Asplen worked closely with both Attorneys General Reno and Ashcroft to develop DNA policy for the Department of Justice, and also testified before Congress to help appropriate over $160 million for forensic DNA testing. He has consulted with the governments of over 25 countries on the use of DNA technology to fight crime and support victims. Mr. Asplen is currently the Vice President of Governmental Affairs for Gordon Thomas Honeywell. Our second speaker is Sergeant William McVey. He has been a police officer with the Bensalem Township Police Department in Pennsylvania since 1998. He has spent time in the Patrol Division as a field training officer, K-9 handler, and squad supervisor. He was reassigned to the Detective Division in 2008 and is currently responsible for the supervision of the Department's Criminal Investigations Unit. Sergeant McVey is part of the team responsible for the development and current administration of the Department's DNA program. And thank you. I just want to thank everyone so much for being with us today. I know your schedules are very hectic, so we appreciate your time. And here I am handing the control over to Chris.
All right. Well, thank you, Ilsa. It's great to be here. I appreciate, as Ilsa said, I appreciate everyone attending today. If my voice goes silent, it may be because we've got an aftershock and I'm running for the doors. But I hope that everybody is okay wherever they are. If there is kind of a subtitle of today's webinar, I think it would really be how to maximize the potential of DNA technology using local DNA databases. And it's a different concept than probably most people attending this webinar, or a different way of thinking about DNA and databases. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really contrast this local DNA database issue and contrast that with the way that the CODIS national database works and the way that most people think about DNA databasing. But there are kind of a couple of different, I guess, basic propositions, if you will, to think about first as we go through this webinar. And the first is the way the CODIS DNA database works is that it provides a really important national tool for fighting crime. The way that we understand the national DNA databasing system is one that, as I'll show, works on kind of three levels, a local, state, and a national level. But what it does is it empowers police as an investigative tool to take a profile from a crime scene and to take that profile, put it in a database, and compare both locally and then on a statewide basis to see whether or not that matches anybody else in the state system, anyone who may have been convicted of a crime or arrested of a crime in certain states. And it also allows us to compare that crime scene profile to another state. However, some of the restrictions that are imposed by the CODIS system restrict that investigative value. It's a very valuable system in many ways, but there are parts of the system that really prevent maximizing its potential, as I said. And local DNA databases that are really run by the law enforcement agencies themselves, can really maximize the investigative value of DNA technology by placing the databasing technology directly in the hands of police and encouraging faster turnaround time. Now, the bottom line is this, that DNA technology started off in the United States really as a great prosecutorial tool, an infinitely better prosecutorial tool than it was investigative tool, simply because when we got DNA at a crime scene, without the database, the police still had to kind of go through their traditional investigative process to get a suspect against which to compare that profile. Well, that was great for prosecutors, but it didn't solve or didn't save any time for police. It didn't save any money for police. They still had to do their thing before they got a suspect, and then lo and behold, once they did, then prosecutors had a great piece of evidence. But it wasn't a good investigative tool. Databases have the potential of changing all of that, right? So if we look at forensic databases, they make DNA a better investigative tool, and they do a number of things. First of all, as you'll see on the slide, they make cold cases relevant again. Cases that have been unsolved for years and years and years and years. Now we can go back and we can look at those cases. We can see whether or not there's any biological evidence that still exists. And we can now profile that evidence, put it in a database that consists of, now in the United States, 9 million people, potentially 9 million suspects. Even if there was no other reason to ever reopen that cold case, the DNA database now gives us that reason. And it gives us that reason every time more people are added to the database. Every time a state includes more convicted offender profiles, more arrestee profiles, every time that happens, that case essentially gets reinvestigated, right? So we reinvestigate a case every time new profiles are added. That's not only for old cases, but that's for our more current cases that may be unsolved, may not be deemed or defined as cold, but still we want them investigated every single day. Now, the other thing that forensic databases do is they identify serial offenders and they connect cases. That can either be on a local level, individual to police departments or neighboring police departments. That can be on a state level, or as we've seen recently in cases like the Grim Sleeper case and the serial homicides and serial rape cases, those connections can be made across state borders based on our forensic database. And that's really the great value of INDIS, our national DNA databasing system. But as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm going to talk about two different kinds of DNA databases, one of which I'll refer to as the CODIS database, and that's kind of the national system, if you will, that has been established by the FBI, is run under FBI guidelines. And then there's kind of a new trend emerging of local, non-CODIS affiliated DNA databases, which don't have some of the restrictions and regulations that the CODIS database has. So that's really what we're going to be doing. We're going to be kind of contrasting the CODIS system and a local DNA databasing system different from CODIS. So if we talk about CODIS first, it was established and administered by the FBI. It's subject to federal FBI guidelines. The CODIS system is the input into the national system or a national connectivity of individual DNA databases. You've got to be part of CODIS if you're going to have the ability to connect beyond your individual location, your own jurisdiction, beyond your own state, etc. You've got to be part of the CODIS system. CODIS only uses labs that are approved by the FBI and CODIS for input into that system. Private laboratories are utilized, but there are some issues with that, particularly from a timing standpoint that I'll talk about in a bit. But the key component for the CODIS system are those CODIS approved labs, those public laboratories, law enforcement laboratories that do the DNA testing and put those profiles into the database. And CODIS actually itself, well, it stands for the Combined DNA Indexing System. CODIS is really a databasing software. That's all it is. It's a databasing software that takes the profiles developed at the crime scene and the profiles developed from offenders, be they arrestees or be they convicted offenders, and it compares the two against each other. We call them indices. So you've got the offender index and the crime scene index. And it also has the ability to match crime scene to crime scene. So that's kind of the national picture, if you will. But when we talk about local or non-CODIS affiliated DNA databases, we're talking about a couple of different dynamics from that CODIS system. First of all, the DNA testing is done by laboratories that have the same accreditation and follow the same rules and regs as CODIS does. Many times, these labs provide DNA profiles to the CODIS system also. In other words, a private laboratory such as Orchid Cellmark or Bodhi Technologies, okay, they will provide DNA services, DNA analysis services to both these local databases, but also to the CODIS system databases. But when they provide those services to the national FBI authority-based database, they have to go through an extensive technical review process. In other words, those private labs can't upload directly into the database system. They have to be not reanalyzed chemically, but reanalyzed statistically, if you will, at the local CODIS level. And that slows things down considerably. But that's not the case when we talk about a local database. But the profiles that are developed from those private laboratories, what we look at, the 13 loci or more that we look at, are the exact same loci that we look at in the official CODIS FBI system, right? And what that means is that if we wanted to, and we don't do it now, but if we wanted to, we could share that data between the two different databases that we're talking about. Because number one, we look at the exact same loci, we do the testing the exact same way by laboratories that are all accredited and follow the same regulations, okay? And the local database is run by a commercially produced software, not the CODIS software. So, how did CODIS begin? CODIS was initially a pilot project that began in 1990, serving 14 state and local laboratories. The DNA Identification Act of 1994 formalized the FBI's authority to establish a national DNA index for law enforcement purposes. And then in 1998, the FBI's National DNA Indexing System became operational. CODIS is implemented as a distributed database with 3 hierarchical levels or tiers: local, state, and national. This is kind of what the architecture looks like for CODIS. You see there on the top, that's INDIS. INDIS stands for the National DNA Indexing System. What feeds into the National Indexing System are the SDIS, or the State DNA Indexing Systems. So every state in the country has its own SDIS, or State DNA Indexing System. And every state in this national CODIS architecture can compare against every other state. But then if we go down one more level, you'll see that we have local laboratories in the individual states. They're called LDIS, Local DNA Indexing Systems, which feed up into the state, which there again feed up into the national system. So if we look there at Florida, Tallahassee has a laboratory with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Tampa has a laboratory. Palm Beach has a laboratory. They're all official CODIS laboratories. So they all provide profiles which are ultimately uploaded into the Florida database and ultimately uploaded into the national database. So if you look at that picture there, the Palm Beach laboratory DNA profile can be compared to data that ultimately comes from, if you look at the left of that diagram, ultimately can be compared to, let's say, an offender who was arrested or convicted in Portland, Oregon. And that's all going to happen up at the top there where you see the map of the United States in the INDIS system. So that's the way that the official CODIS, or National Databasing System, works. So how does data get into that CODIS system? As I said, that tiered approach allows state and local agencies to operate their databases according to specific legislative or legal requirements. Now, what that means in terms of the specific legislative requirements is, as most of you probably know, every state has decided on its own what individuals or who will be included in their database. They decide whether or not convicted offenders and arrestees will be included, and which convicted offenders or arrestees will be included. Right now, every state in the country allows for the inclusion of all felony convicts. So anyone convicted of a felony in any state is automatically going to go into the DNA database. Beyond that, states vary somewhat in terms of the expansive nature of their database. Right now, however, only 25 states allow for the inclusion of individuals simply arrested for crimes and not yet convicted. So only 25 of those allow that. However, when we talk about entering data into the CODIS system, only a CODIS administrator can enter data into a national database. So in other words, for this huge system in any given state or any given local laboratory that is a CODIS laboratory, there's only one or two people who have that ability or that authority to make sure or make the decision as to whether or not that profile, maybe your profile or a profile in your case, goes into that database. Now, all DNA profiles originate at the local level and then flow to the state, and then the state goes up to the national, as I said. And this enables the public laboratories to exchange and compare DNA profiles against all other entered profiles. So who enters it into the CODIS? National DNA Indexing System is maintained by the FBI. They're the ones that establish the rules and the regulations originally. And ultimately that national connectivity, the system that connects all the individual states, that's run by the FBI. The state indexing system is, each state has one designated ESDIS maintained by a CODIS administrator. And then, as I said, the local DNA indexing system has a local CODIS administrator. Now, who cannot enter data into CODIS? In other words, if you've got a sample or a profile that you really, really want to get into this system that you think is really important for one reason or another, who can't help you with that? Well, law enforcement agencies themselves, they can't do that. Unless, for example, it's the Miami-Dade Police Department and they have a CODIS laboratory. Well, they could do it. But if you're a member of most departments in the country, you don't have your own local lab that is CODIS approved. So you can't make that decision. You can't get that profile into the database. And also, as I said, private laboratories that do this DNA testing, that often are to which samples are outsourced from public labs, they don't have the ability to directly upload into CODIS either. What happens is that when they do a DNA analysis, be it for a convicted offender or be it for a piece of evidence, when that profile is completed, that then goes to the state CODIS lab. And that state CODIS lab then has to allocate man-hours and funding to have those profiles be what we call technically reviewed. And the reason that's important, and to some, in my mind, is a difficult thing at times, is because that takes time and it takes money. And if we're talking about maximizing the potential of DNA technology, what hinders that more than anything is time. The longer it takes to get a profile from the crime scene into the database, the less effective it is, the less of a powerful investigative tool it is, because of what I said in the beginning, right? In the beginning, I said that if we're not turning these cases around quickly enough, we're not really using this as an investigative tool. And so that problem, or that issue, that regulation, if you will, of requiring that technical review, again, it's requiring of labs that have the exact same certifications and accreditations as the public labs do. That extra step costs money and costs time. And money and time means we're not solving as many crimes as we otherwise should. And if we're not solving as many crimes as we otherwise should, we're not preventing as many crimes. Okay. Yep. So what type of information is compared in CODIS? This is the official CODIS system that goes into the National DNA Indexing System. Well, they look at convicted offender samples. We can do that. Arrestee samples in, as I said, 25 states. Only 25 states have passed arrestee legislation. More will pass it in the future, but right now only 25 states. Unknown forensic crime scene samples can be profiled and can be put into the system, but they have to be unknown. In other words, if a crime scene sample is gathered and there is a belief as to who the suspect is or who contributed that, that is not an allowable sample or to be profiled and put into the CODIS system. It has to be an unknown profile. But as you can imagine, there may be times when a police agency, while believing they know who this suspect is and believing that they know that that suspect contributed that sample, let's say it's blood at a burglary, well, there may be many reasons why they would still very much like to have that in a database, for example, to compare whether or not he committed several other burglaries in the area. Now, what can't be compared in CODIS? Suspect profiles, volunteer profiles, arrestees in the other 25 states, and as I mentioned before, known forensic crime scene profiles. In other words, if there's a burglary that occurs in a particular jurisdiction, and let's say it's in the context of a string of burglaries over a week-and-a-half time period, if police identify a suspect, they cannot take that suspect sample, even if he volunteers it, right, and put it in the database to see whether or not it hits on anything else. A local database that you'll hear about when Bill McVey talks about, a local database that is not part of CODIS would allow you to do that. It has much more flexibility to allow you to include volunteers, suspects, other arrestees, etc. But CODIS as I said, CODIS is an important crime-fighting tool, and I don't mean to suggest that it's not. There's 180 participating laboratories, over 9 million offender profiles, 384,000 forensic profiles, and they've gotten 149,200 hits and 143,200 investigations that have been aided across the country. So I don't mean to imply that by suggesting there is another opportunity here, that there is another application for DNA testing, that the CODIS system and the national indexing system does not have its place, is not effective. I don't believe it's as effective as it could be or should be, and I think that that's why these local databases have begun to emerge. I think what we're seeing, and I think it'll be much clearer after Bill talks, is what we're seeing is that local databases that are not affiliated with CODIS are filling a space and a need that the CODIS system does not address because of the regulations and rules and things like that, and turnaround time particularly, that prevent us from really maximizing its potential. So why a local DNA database? Why isn't the CODIS national database sufficient in many instances? First of all, most crime is local, right? Most police departments and police officers understand that. Property crimes are our most recidivistic crimes, and that's really where local DNA databases are most important and most effective. Criminals usually offend repeated in the same area. Burglars will burglarize, one neighborhood and then the next neighborhood and then the next neighborhood over. Most burglars don't go from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then travel out to California and burglarize there, and then go down to Texas and burglarize there. Now, they may ultimately wind up in those areas, but when they're actually committing their crime, when they're on their burglary spree, they're doing it locally for the most part. And that applies to burglary cases. It applies to car theft cases. Those property crimes cases for which local databasing can be very, very effective. Burglars break into one house in a neighborhood and then move to the next house, not the next state. Again, and I'm repeating this theme because it's really one of the most important. That first sentence there, DNA is only an effective investigative tool if the DNA analysis is performed quickly enough to be of value. It's one of the reasons why the state databases and the local CODIS databases, right, the official CODIS local databases, are not as effective as they could be. It's really one of the reasons that you have this emergence of these local non-CODIS databases is turnaround time takes so long. It's a resource issue. It's not the fault of the local laboratories. It's not the fault of the state laboratories. It's nobody's fault other than the fact that there's just not enough money going around so that we can get these cases turned. These backlogs prevent us from using DNA as well as we should. The bottom line is if a case is taking 6 months to 8 months to turn around from a DNA perspective, then it's not an investigative tool. DNA is not being used as an investigative tool if it takes us 6 to 8 months to get that profile into the system. Investigators can't stop investigating while they wait for results. No time or money is saved if turnaround time for results is beyond several weeks. And the CODIS restrictions on the private laboratories extend the length of time and money it costs to get a profile into the databasing system. CODIS rules and guidelines also restrict the kinds of profiles that can be entered. As I said before, suspects can't be entered. Known forensic profiles cannot be entered. And law enforcement agencies have little control over database with CODIS. Local databases are driven by local agencies, not the federal authorities. And again, let me go back and explain. I'm not knocking CODIS. Those rules and regulations for a national system are there for a reason, particularly when we first started doing this databasing stuff, when creating a national DNA database was a new idea. I think it was probably right and appropriate to have a lot of the restrictions that we have now. But when those restrictions begin to really affect the extent to which DNA is an effective investigative tool, I think they need to be reanalyzed, or you have this other opportunity arise, which is this local databasing concept. Let me give you an example from Palm Bay, Florida. Palm Bay, Florida has had a local DNA databasing system for a number of years now. And what they do is they essentially outsource their DNA testing to a private laboratory. And that private laboratory has agreed to turn those cases around very quickly. They turn them around in about 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. The Palm Bay database has a total of, and this data is a little bit old. This is probably about 4 to 6 months old. But they had a total of 12,827 profiles, 3,200 reference samples, 9,627 crime scene profiles. Their hit to volume percentage is 6.2%. In other words, they get hits to their database that much more than the national database, and 6 times more than the national database. And if you were to say to any police department or any police officer in Palm Bay, Florida, hey, when was the last time you got a hit in your local database? They would say, last week. And they'd know exactly when it was because it's their case. If you were to ask someone in Palm Bay when the last time was they got a state hit in the national system or a hit to some other state, they probably could not tell you. Why is that? Most crime is local. Most crime is local, and that's why their local database is so effective. Palm Bay gets almost 6 times the value for the resources it invests in DNA than any resource they would invest in the national or the state system, right? That's how much more effective their local database is. And if they're going to put money someplace, they want to maximize its effectiveness. They want to make sure that their money is being spent on those local cases and nothing else. The value of Palm Bay's investment in DNA also exceeds the proportional success of Florida's database. Now, I talked about the national comparison, but Florida's combined database of, and again, this is maybe 3 months ago, 734,763 maintains a 4.1 volume to hit ratio. So the local database in Little Palm Bay, Florida is more effective, gets a higher hit rate than the state database does. And that's because Palm Bay decides who goes in it. Palm Bay has worked out a way to get those cases turned around quickly. And if they're solving cases that much more, that much more often they're preventing cases, new cases, that much more often, and saving money every time they do it. So if we kind of do a side-by-side comparison of local databases and then the official CODIS database. Local databases specifically designed to solve crime locally. They're governed by criteria set by the investigating agency. CODIS emphasizes a national crime-fighting network and is governed by rules established by federal authorities, maximizing the investigative value of forensic DNA technology, whereas CODIS can restrict the investigative potential of forensic DNA. There's more that we could do with DNA databases than we're doing with CODIS right now. Local database focuses 100% of financial and personnel resources on local agencies' crime, whereas CODIS spreads resources both across the state and the national system, diluting the local crime-fighting impact. Local databases can provide rapid turnaround time, DNA profile and database search, resolving cases more quickly. Local databases provide database results directly to investigating officers. Now, in CODIS, those results, when you get a hit, they first go to the CODIS administrator's office, and then eventually it kind of filters down to the investigating agency. In a local databasing scenario, the information goes from the laboratory to the police officer, literally in his car, on his computer in his car in the case of Palm Bay. They have a databasing system where an officer could be sitting in his vehicle with his laptop, get an email saying, you got a hit on this case from 2 weeks ago. That's kind of the real CSI stuff, if you will. Whereas that process is a much more, a much longer process, if you will, having to go through a lot more hands on the state system. Now I'm going to move along a little bit to keep us to time. The National Institute of Justice sponsored a property crime experiment, and they compared DNA testing to fingerprinting when it comes to property crimes and the effectiveness. Well, here's what they came up with. Twice as many suspects identified with DNA, twice as many cases accepted for prosecution with DNA. DNA is 5 times as likely to ID a suspect compared with fingerprints. Suspects identified with DNA had at least twice as many prior felonies and convictions. And this last bullet is really important. Material collected by technicians is no more likely to result in a suspect being identified than material collected by patrol officers. And what that means is that DNA collected, or DNA collection in these burglary cases, these car theft cases, doing these swabs, and Bill will talk more about this, but doing these swabs is not brain surgery, as we say. It's something that police officers can be easily trained. Now, there are many, 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 many times when you want specific crime scene officers to handle a crime scene. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to imply that that's not the case. What I'm saying, though, is that there is a whole universe of cases out there that we're not addressing with DNA right now. Burglaries, car thefts, things like that, where we don't need sophisticated crime scene officers there, where these collections can be done by patrol officers that are well trained. The burglary project in Denver was one of the sites in that NIJ study. What they came up with is a prolific burglar commits an average of 243 cases a year. When DNA is recovered, the prosecution rate is 5 times higher. The average sentence for burglars linked to DNA is over 12 years in prison. 6 months without DNA evidence. Why is that? No negotiating by the prosecutor if you've got DNA evidence, right? You can take a much harder stand. And after police arrested one guy who later admitted to 1,000 burglaries, the burglary rate in West Washington Park neighborhood dropped 40%. And ultimately, our goal is to keep people from being victimized from crime in the first place, particularly in the context of burglaries and car thefts. You take one guy off the street with a DNA test, according to the Denver project, you're going to prevent 242 other cases that year. That's a pretty big return on investment when you're investing in DNA technology. If we go, in conclusion, again, CODIS provides an important national tool for fighting crime. It really does. Just because there's another alternative doesn't mean that the way CODIS exists now is important and it's not a very important function. It is. However, there is a way to maximize forensic DNA technology and databasing that we're currently not doing because we're not turning cases around quickly enough. We're not putting the technology in the hands of police agencies themselves, and so we're not solving cases quickly enough and ultimately preventing crime, which, as I said, that's the most important thing, is to keep people from being victimized in the first place. So that being said, I will finish with this, that one of my jobs is to help encourage police departments maximize the potential of DNA technology in any way that they can. And if that includes a local DNA database, and you are interested in looking into this further, exploring some of the details, looking at the possibilities of how to get something like this funded, I am more than happy to assist at no charge to you, and would do anything that I can to help out. So with that, I will turn this back over to Ilsa or to Bill, however that's going to go. Thanks, folks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Oh, there we go. Couldn't tell if my phone, my laptop, sorry, my headset was working. I think this earthquake sort of shook up my brain a little bit. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Sergeant Bill McVey now, and let's see if we can get him unmuted. There we go. Whoops. Oh, there we go. All right. Bill, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you copy?
Okay. Yep. Copy that. Here you go.
Hi, everyone. How you doing? I'll echo Chris's thanks to ISIL and all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us today and discuss the use of local databases to help you prevent crimes in your areas and assist in the prosecutions of those you arrest. Just to put a little disclaimer out there, I am not an expert in DNA. I don't have any real forensic background. I'm a police officer. I'm a sergeant of the detective division. And the way I got involved with this was from being approached by Chris with other members of our department and being introduced to this idea. But before we get into that, just to give a brief background on Bensalem, like I'm sure many of the departments who have signed on here today, we're a local department, a suburban area, and we have a population of just about 90,000. We border a major city, Philadelphia, and we're just about 10 miles south of Trenton, New Jersey. We have 103 sworn officers in our department, and our detective division is made up of about 15 detectives currently. For Bensalem, like many small municipalities, we're not faced with a high murder rate or robbery rate. Our citizens of this township are affected by property crime. Each year since I've been here, our burglaries, theft from autos, and vehicle thefts have remained basically constant, if not risen. And what we're trying to do here is to lower that, like every other municipality around here. And we're not having much success. So when this idea was presented to us by Chris, approximately in, I guess, late 2009, it was kind of foreign to us to use DNA to assist with solving and prosecuting property crimes. Chris came to us, and at the time he was in the process of running for district attorney of this area, and we were a little hesitant on what his motive was, but as Chris proved, he was clearly dedicated to the DNA being used to assist with local law enforcement agencies. He presented the idea to us of using touch DNA, something that I'll admit I'd never heard of before. I was used to blood or semen or saliva. He introduced this concept that you can use touch DNA at crime scenes with the use of a local database for property crimes, submit them to that database, and have a turnaround time of approximately 30 days. So if you develop a full profile on those touch cells or DNA, you can then identify someone who may be in your local database. He recommended us visit Palm Bay, Florida, which he just spent time speaking about, to review their policies, their program, and kind of see how it was going. Our chief was very impressed with Chris's presentation, and as any chief, who wouldn't be interested in lowering your property crimes, your overall crime rate, and making the citizens of your community a little bit safer? And he's very progressive, so he's very interested in this program. I believe the initial goal that Chris presented, and what we still guide ourselves with today, is to use this local database to collect DNA from all of our local offenders And what's nice about this program is we choose, like Chris mentioned earlier, if someone's arrested for disorderly conduct, assault, weapons offense, robbery, burglary, it's our choice to collect their DNA as long as they consent to it, or if we seek a search warrant or court order to obtain it. It's then our choice to send that DNA in, to put them in to our database. So it's taking this goal of using that database with our local offenders to help solve crimes that have recently been committed, but more importantly, prevent the crimes from being committed again. Because as Chris did mention, most burglars, car thieves, or just thieves in general will continue their sprees in your community day in, day out until they're caught. And then you'll see a sudden drop-off. They get released and they start back up again. Move on here. So when we were approached by this, Chris came with a few ideas of federal funding on how we could maybe seek a grant to do this. Some of the problems we saw with that, like all of you may experience, is they take a little bit too long. And especially nowadays with the economy the way it is, it's a little tighter to get money out of the government. So our chief was very committed to this, and he decided that we were going to allocate funds from our drug forfeiture fund to pay for this program. In our department, we have 3 detectives assigned to federal task forces, 2 with the DEA and 1 with the FBI. So we are fortunate that the investigations they're involved in locally and federally, that a specified amount is allocated to our department for their role in that investigation. This is an approved allocation of funds, and it's in my mind, a very genius way of doing this, because as we all know, most of the people responsible for breaking into cars or houses are those that are abusing drugs. So we're kind of getting the whole, I guess, realm of the narcotics field. We're using the money we seize from these drug dealers to fund our program to identify thieves and who are abusing drugs and take them off the street. I'm not going to spend too much time here. Chris hit the subject pretty well, but obviously, as all of you other law enforcement officers who are here today know, the turnaround time for the state, no fault of their own, is extremely long. I know that when we were initially asked this question, when this was presented to us, I only knew of about 4 or 5 cases in the last few years where we actually received a hit through CODIS. And when we talk about property crimes, I believe the turnaround time for blood recovered in a burglary was 9 months to 12 months. I believe the offender was already in state prison, and I'm sure he was long gone from our township to actually prevent more of those crimes from being committed when they were initially occurring. So we obviously saw the problem, and we agreed with Chris, and we moved forward. And when Chris sent us down to Palm Bay, I have to give a shout out to DNA SI Labs, who does Palm Bay's testing. I'm not affiliated with them other than we use their labs, but I have nothing but positive praise for that organization. They sent their law enforcement representative, Jay Witt, who I would speak very highly of, is a former homicide investigator and really knows how to relate to the cops, to train each and every one of our officers on the street on the protocols how to collect DNA. He showed us how simple it was. It took a few minutes, if that, to process a scene, to collect touch DNA cells or blood, and also how to swab someone to take a buccal swab. We were trained, 3 of us, our administrative team here is Sergeant Dave Richardson, myself, and Detective Glenn Vandergrift. And it was Jay and the people from DNA SI Labs who kind of recommended this 3-person team. They looked at our organization, and they saw that the detective sergeants are responsible for the crime mapping, assigning cases, and basic overall crime patterns in the township. And Glenn had a vast experience and expertise in crime scene processing, fingerprinting, and DNA collection. So it kind of just worked for us, the 3 of us. Our main mission here was to coordinate the training with Jay of all our personnel, which we did within 1 week. So we were up and running once we committed, had the training. After 1 week of training, having people on the street collecting DNA to put in our database. The 3 of us, one of our main jobs is to triage these samples collected by the officers. And what we're doing there is we're looking to see the names, see the incidents they had within our department, whether we feel they're a repeat offender, and whether we feel that they may be a suspect in whatever they were brought in for, questioned about, or other crimes that are currently unsolved. We'll then, as long as it was collected legally, decide to send that to our local database. One of the main points that I would like to touch here is that for any organization looking to do this, you're almost obligated to consult with your district attorney's office prior to committing to this. Obviously, they prosecute the cases, so they're going to have to provide you with the legal issues and advice on whether or not this program, in their mind, will be upheld in whatever court they're prosecuting in. In Bucks County, where we're located, our DA's office has been excellent. We've met with them in the beginning, and since that time, to kind of mend our program and change when we thought we needed to, or prepare for different trials that may be coming up to make sure that we present our evidence in the best manner possible. Another job is to act as a liaison with the laboratory, which has been no problem at all. I know if you deal with state labs, sometimes it takes a while to get a call back. They're very busy, and if you're calling about a low priority case, you're not going to get the attention you feel you may need. If we pick up the phone today and call DNA SI Labs, we'll get a voice on the other line. If not, if they're closed, we could call Jay Witt on his cell phone, and we'll have an answer within a few minutes to a few hours, and we're guaranteed to be satisfied on what we're asking to be done by them. And basically, when we talk about our collection protocols, there's a picture there of one of our sergeants who's actually, the video's not going to play today. He was basically swabbing one of the kilos of heroin that we recovered from a trap when we worked with the DEA. But when we talk about suspect collections, we're talking about a buccal or cheek swab. In our department, we do them voluntarily upon all arrest. If they refuse to comply with us, then we do not collect their DNA. It's that simple. If it's something we feel that we need, we may seek to get a search warrant or court order with our DA's approval. We may collect it surreptitiously. We don't know what that means, if we feel it's necessary, or if they abandon their property. And then when we talk about evidence collections, this is what we do the most of. When the officers are on the street, they respond to a theft from auto, a burglary, or other crime, they now have the ability to, within minutes of that call, swab the areas that they feel would reveal the most probability of DNA being present. And a side benefit of this, what's nice about that, is with the CSI effect in our community today, I can tell you that a side benefit of this is that our citizens are extremely pleased and happy to see the way we handle our crime scenes. They're almost taken back when they see officers swabbing a vehicle because the window was smashed and their radio was stolen or GPS unit was stolen. So our community relations have actually built up as a result of this, and our victims and citizens seem to be pleased with the direction of our department now. And then evidence, and it should be suspect triage as well. This is what I touched on earlier. We just decide, based on the training from Jay Witt and the laboratory and our own experience now, where we feel what swabbed areas will reveal the most practical or most probable DNA. For example, if there's blood compared to touch cells, we'll obviously send the blood. But we've also identified areas in stolen vehicles or where vehicles have been broken into where we feel touch cells are more prevalent than others. So we talk again about DNA SI Labs and the LODIS system. LODIS is their internal system that tracks all of our DNA in our database. It's an interface, and this is, to me, what makes this program such a success. Chris touched on this earlier. We are able to view all of our samples in our database through the internet at any time from any computer, basically any place. When we send our samples in, within 30 days, we get our results. Each individual officer receives a result which tells them whether they received a full profile on their swab, if it's a suspect, or if it's evidence, if they got a full profile developed, if they have a partial mixed profile, or if there's no DNA found at all. So the officers get constant feedback. We also, through this, are able to develop training needs if we see an officer's contaminating scenes, or we see an officer's DNA showing up as a contamination over different courses of a scene or different periods of time, where we can bring them in for retraining. So the LODIS system itself provides direct feedback to the officers, and then a key for the supervisors here and for the people who command these divisions. Supervisors also receive that same email, which I can say does become annoying over time if your officers aren't checking off on it. So it gives you the ability to see what officers are and what officers are not complying with the system. So you have your oversight built in, really at no extra cost or extra effort to the people within your agency. So the interesting part about our program we'll get into now, and hopefully spice this up a little bit. So within about 16 months of our program, we have collected a total of 3,800 samples, 2,200 reference and 1,600 evidence samples. Of that, we have submitted 1,000 reference profiles into our database and 800 evidence profiles. So we have 1,800 samples in our database now that each new sample will be compared against. Of all those 800 evidence samples that we've submitted, 23% have yielded no DNA. Now that could be a few things. That could be the officer swabbing an area no one touched, or he's not swabbing it effectively enough, and that's something that we as the administrators will track to see if we can retrain or try and reduce that number in the future. Our statistics, which I think is the eye-opening part of this program, and I almost feel that the people at DNASI Labs and Chris himself predicted, came true. Our total number of hits in the database is 124, to me, which is astounding after only 18 months. We had 59 cases with hits on it, and of those 59, 37 aided in a criminal investigation. I know that in the last 5 years, as you can see on the screen, we've had less than a dozen CODIS hits. And the main point here is many of these are not violent crimes that CODIS would only take. We're getting hits on narcotics cases, property crimes, violent crimes, and others. A key point here, for those of you who are experts in fingerprinting, know how difficult it is to lift latent fingerprints off a weapon. We've matched DNA on guns in 5 cases in Bensalem, which is huge. In many of these cases, they're leading to guilty pleas, if they're constructive possession cases of the gun, or if they're involved in a robbery with a gun, because the DNA now links them to that gun. Here's a breakdown of our cases, the 37. 17 are narcotics, 12 are property, 5 violent, and 3 others. By the others, 2 were near-fatal accidents where we were able to match DNA located on the vehicle or on the windshield to the striking vehicle, the victims to the striking vehicle, to bring that case together. I'm going to go through 5 cases at Bensalem that Glenn, Dave, and I have chosen that we think will really open the eyes of the law enforcement members here today and see how important this actually is and see how effective it is. Our first case, which I really feel is an interesting case because it probably would have been no charge, it could have led to a cop being disciplined, and it could have just been an overall bad scenario for everyone involved except for the bad guys because they would win. It was a constructive possession case of 30 vials of crack. The officer picked these people up after they were locked up by our narcotics unit, and lo and behold, 30 vials of crack were discovered in the rear of the van after they were transported. Of course, each suspect denied having any knowledge or possessing the vials of crack at all. They all consented to the buccal swab because, like many cases, they're thinking blood or semen. They're not thinking of touch DNA. So the exterior glassine bags were swabbed, and each of the DNA profiles of the suspects was sent to the lab. Within 30 days, and this was, I believe, one of our first hits, we identified one of the 5 suspects as being the carrier of the 30 vials of crack. He was then charged, and I believe he has currently entered a plea of guilty, if it's not through the system yet. So just by that alone, we were able to make a bad situation turn good, and we were able to make an arrest and actually identify who was carrying those narcotics, which we definitely would not have been able to do otherwise. Number 2 is a stolen vehicle / hit and run accident investigation. I'm sure many of you officers on here today investigate these on a daily basis, and basically our police officers responded to a hit and run. When they got there, they ran the tag and determined the vehicle to be stolen. They located blood droplets inside the vehicle, which they then swabbed. They sent those droplets to the lab, and within 30 days, we had a match for a suspect who was previously entered in our database for disorderly conduct. Now, everyone knows that that suspect would never, ever have made it into CODIS. So we identified him when we seen his arrest for disorderly conduct as someone who had many previous conducts and someone whose DNA we wanted. He consented to it, and then as you can see, we were later able to use that DNA to solve that crime. Our next one was an armed robbery investigation. We had an unknown suspect at gunpoint rob a 7-Eleven. He then fled on foot. Our responding officers located someone matching that description of the actor. They later located a gun a short distance away in a restaurant in a trash can hidden. They swabbed the DNA on the gun, and they also got a buccal swab, which the defendant consented to. He denied ever possessing the gun. Within 30 days, we received a hit from DNASI Labs that matched our suspect to the DNA on the gun. Once this information was relayed to the district attorney's office and to the suspect's defense attorney, he quickly changed his intentions and entered a plea of guilty. Our next one, which is our first blind hit I'll discuss, and it was our second blind hit in our system, is one that I think is priceless to the system, and I think this is the poster of what Chris and the people at the DNASI Labs are out there trying to spread the word about. It was a burglary investigation that had basically zero solvability. For those of you who assign cases or get cases, these are the cases that don't make it past the desk, and if they make it to a detective, they don't go further than his desk. We had no solvability. We basically had a burglary. We had no witnesses. The only evidence that the officers collected on scene, which probably would not have been collected before this program, was a discarded cigarette butt. The officer submitted that cigarette butt, and we sent it to the lab. Within 30 days, we received a match on a suspect who was previously locked up in our department for a weapons offense at a school and who consensually provided a buccal swab at that time. The interesting part about this case is he not only confessed to his involvement in it, but he also implicated two others and gave their names, who were later interviewed, and they also confessed to their involvement in the case. And if there was one case I could pick out where we're trying to make victims whole and actually do a service to our people in our community, is this one. Because of this program, we were able to not only prosecute the case and close out a case for our purposes, but we were able to have the victim in this case reimburse the funds he was out for the damage that these individuals caused in his home by breaking in. And then case 5, which I believe was the picture that we showed earlier that we couldn't play, was a narcotics investigation in conjunction with the DEA's office, where our officers conducted a vehicle stop along Route 1. During that stop, they located a hidden compartment. The driver of the vehicle denied any knowledge of this compartment or any knowledge of anything that may be contained in there. 12 kilograms of cocaine were found in this compartment, and we obviously swabbed the exterior packaging of the cocaine for DNA. We sent that in as well as the driver's DNA, which he consented to a buccal swab, and we matched his DNA to the packaging on the kilos of heroin, which is obviously going to play a key part in the prosecution of him if he does not decide to plead guilty. So overall, I think if I could get a message out there is start thinking of using DNA up front. We here at Bensalem, and by no fault of ours, we never thought of it that way. We always looked at it as something to be used in trial, something for major cases. So it was kind of a mind-changing process for us that we really had to start training the officers on the street who collect most of the DNA that we're going to use the DNA up front. We're going to identify people in the beginning process of their crime spree, hopefully, through the officer's collection of DNA, and then we're going to track that person and use this DNA as a part of the investigation. We're not going to get DNA and then automatically go arrest someone based on that. We're using it as one tool in the toolbox. We're going to go interview them with the DNA results, which most likely will yield a confession. If not, then we may look to charge from some other angles or aspects. But the DNA evidence is usually something that we have found elicits a confession from most of the people we then confront. So, in general, I think it's a great program. I think our department has proven that it can work. I hope that agencies within the state, especially those that border us, sign on for this program, because then that identifies more people for us. We often know we're from a county. We have multiple townships and municipalities inside that county. So our offenders kind of jump border to border in that regard. So the more people we have on board with this, the more we have the ability to solve crimes and to do a service to the people in our community. So that's all I have right now. And again, thank you for everyone for participating. And if anyone needed any questions answered from my agency or me or the other people that administer this program, you can contact me at 215-633-3758, and hopefully we can direct you or answer any questions you may have. So thank you very much.
Sorry, I was muted. I couldn't get off my mute. Everything is a little topsy-turvy. I just wanted to thank both of you for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. And we're over time, but we do have a little bit of time for some questions. But I don't have any coming in yet. If people have questions, you want to send them in just a minute. We'll have a few minutes we can answer them. I want to let everybody know that today's presentation was recorded, and the webinar will be posted on the webinar link, and the PowerPoints, a couple of you asked about that, will be posted on our website, hopefully by early next week. Also, visit our website to learn about our future webinars and our trainings that we are doing in person around the country. I know that a few people emailed me to say that their offices were evacuated, so people are definitely scattered around today. But if you know of anybody who didn't get to watch the webinar and wants to, let them know that we'll post that link to the recording in a couple of days. Do you have any closing comments, Chris or Bill?
I'll start off. I think that what Bensalem has done is kind of taken this to the next level from a funding standpoint. It really was, you know, I think as Bill pointed out, kind of an act of genius on the part of the Director of Public Safety there to take the concept of drug forfeiture monies and applying it to DNA and to create this cycle, if you will, where they pay for DNA testing and they do the narcotics cases and ultimately get more drug forfeiture money, which then goes back into their DNA testing money. And so they've got this great cycle of resources that has really empowered them. And one thing that I'll share that the Director of Public Safety told me was that if you look at the value of, or the cost, I should say, of a new police officer, which he estimates in his department to be about $104,000, and you compare that to the value of this DNA program for a year, he said there's just no way that a new police officer is going to come close to solving as many crimes as this DNA program. And so he said, you know, he'll take this DNA program anytime. And I think that that really says a lot. And as Bill pointed out, the difficulty is funding. And there are other options besides forfeiture money that again, we can assist with looking into. But that seems to have opened a lot of doors for people to look at that possibility of using drug money for this. So again, I give Bensalem kind of all the credit in the world for that. But again, this is all about maximizing the potential of the technology in a way that many places aren't doing yet.
Okay. And Bill, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we sign off?
Okay, I'm there. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
The only thing I would add is I didn't spend time on our specific pricing and things like that. We're under contract with the lab, and we can't disclose that. What I could say is the price we are getting was not even in comparison to what we would be paying to other private labs in the area. And it was that ability that they offered us that really is what pushed us forward and has given us this program and given us the ability to send all these samples in and get the quick turnaround time. And we have already committed to an additional 2 years with this lab and this program based on the results we've seen already. So we know it's a success here. It's been proven, and we know it can be a success in every other municipality, probably in the country, if it's administered the right way.
Okay, wonderful. You know what? We actually do have one question that I'd like to throw out to you real quick before we sign off. What was Bensalem's budget for the first 12 months?
I can't disclose that. If she wants to call me at a later time, I can give her some ballpark figures. Okay. I think what Chris's comparison to an officer's salary and what our director said and what the chief of Palm Bay said at the time is for a similar cost of what it would be to put a cop on the street, you can institute a program like this. Whether it be between 100 to 200,000 depending on your department, but it's going to be somewhere in that ballpark or that vicinity to institute a program like this.
And also, if I could add to that,
sure.
There's tremendous flexibility in that. The cost is going to be commensurate with whatever program you work out in terms of how many cases per year you're doing. So if you don't have a budget which is the extent of a police officer's salary, if you've got something less than that and you still want to try it, that just means that you're going to be doing less DNA testing. That doesn't mean you can't get it done. So the way it works, and there are other programs besides this one private lab that exist, and other applications, but it can be tailored wherever you do it. It can be simply tailored to whatever your resources happen to be.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chris and Bill. I think we're going to sign off now. We've kept everybody a little bit longer than we had promised. So once again, if you want to check our website for future webinars, we'd love to see you then, and I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.